Guys, we're back from Universal Studios. It's been about a month now, and we decided to go over some of your dying questions about traveling to Universal Studios during this pandemic. So first we're gonna go over the reason why we chose to travel to Universal Studios, our experience during our trip, and if we recommend traveling to Universal Studios during this time. So let's get started.
So why we made this choice? The first question we asked ourselves is, are we putting anybody in danger? And the answer was no. So since this pandemic began, we haven't seen any friends. We haven't seen most family members. We have seen our parents from time to time, but we've been very strict on staying over 6 feet apart, wearing masks, and only seeing each other outside. So I haven't been inside my parents' house, Risa hasn't been inside her parents' house. And that was a very big thing for us. If we take this trip and if we do get sick, right, worst case scenario, are we putting anybody in danger? And the answer was a clear no. And that was the first box we checked before we started planning this trip. Secondly, was it safe? Now that's a very tough question to answer, right? It's gonna be how you feel about it. At the time we went, early June, masks weren't enforced anywhere in our city or state, and Universal Studios was actually enforcing the mask rule. So in our eyes, it seemed to be safer in Universal Studios than it did our local grocery store where the majority of people weren't wearing masks. And with that being said, we took the chance and we decided to plan this trip.
Okay, so let's go over the planning and how we planned for this trip. We decided that it would be safer to travel during a weekday because Universal seemed, from what we saw on YouTube and our research, that it was pretty empty during the weekdays, like literally a dead zone. Everything was 5 to 10 minute wait time, which is crazy for Universal Studios or any other theme park. So we decided a weekday was the best time to go. We also decided to take a road trip versus flying because at the time, in our minds, we thought it would be safer. We found out along the way that when you make a pit stop and with the mask ordinance not being enforced, that practically like less than 5% of the people at those stops were not wearing masks. So we were wearing our masks and protecting them, but they were not doing the same. So that was pretty frustrating along the way.
As far as the road trip goes, spoiler alert, that was the most dangerous part of this trip that we felt. Obviously driving from Texas to Florida, you're driving through a lot of states who don't believe in masks and don't want to wear masks. And Reese has a very small bladder, so we were making frequent stops, and those felt just dreadful. There was one stop at a gas station where a guy started coughing without a mask, and I was so upset. I was upset at the fact that I had put myself in that position. And at that moment, I realized maybe flying would have been better because you're minimizing coming in contact with people without masks. And yeah, so I think as far as the road trip goes, we decided to go that route, but I can't recommend it.
But once we arrived on property, we felt super safe and reassured that it was going to be a pretty safe experience. One, because as soon as you enter the resort property, they give you a temperature check. If you pass the temperature check, they give you a colored wristband. So every day is a different color. So like Monday could be orange, Tuesday could be purple. And that indicates that you have already had a temperature check and that you are good to go. So after the temperature check, they ask you a few screening questions like, have you been sick? Have you traveled somewhere else? You know, the typical COVID screening questions. They also make sure that you have a mask on, and masks are required on property 24/7 unless you're in the pool or eating at one of the restaurants or cafes. You cannot walk around and eat. You have to sit down at a dedicated eating zone to have your mask off. And also another precaution that was super surprising to us is that one party was allowed in the elevator at a time. So that really minimized the time you were in contact with other people. So that was something that was super reassuring, that we were in the elevator alone. And lastly, they had another procedure put in place where room service did not come and attend your room during the stay. They just cleaned before your stay and after your stay. So that minimized people inside your room and potential, touch points throughout your stay.
And one thing to add, these precautions are good on paper, but if they're not enforcing them, they're kind of useless, right? So it really requires people to follow the rules and the staff to enforce the rules. And what was really cool was that the elevator rule, for example, people were following it, people were respecting it. So there was times where you had to wait a little longer to get on the elevator, but that's okay because you're by yourself in the elevator versus being with a large group. And also, like the health checkpoints, there are multiple health checkpoints around the resort.
Yes.
So you can't just kind of skip one. And in the morning, they're like hawks. They're looking at you, seeing what kind of color wristband you have, and making sure that you are kind of up to date with your health screening. So that was reassuring. So let's talk about getting to the park. So obviously, Universal Studios has bus transportation to the theme park. What's important here is you can't actually get on the bus until you've had your health screening. Obviously, in order to get into the bus, they also have social distancing lines and again, all the precautions there. But here's where we get to a con in the experience. So unlike Disney, Universal Studios is not doing any type of social distancing in their buses. Now, in order to get in the bus, you obviously have to pass your health screening and you have to have a mask. But in the morning, if there's a lot of people, they're gonna fill that bus. Now, again, there was times where the bus wasn't as full, and what was really cool about this is, again, people respected space and people were socially distancing. There was one time, our first day to go to the theme park, where the bus was full.
We were standing, actually. It was so full.
So I think that's the one major con. Now, this only happened to us once, I think we took maybe 5 or 6 buses.
Yeah.
But it was a little shocking that there was no social distancing. There was no plexiglass separating people. It was a packed bus. Now everybody was wearing masks, and that's, I guess, a little better. But I think at that point in time, I definitely did not feel safe.
Yeah, so that's definitely an area where Universal could improve. But we did still feel safer than being at our local grocery store, because at the time the mask ordinance was not in place and everybody in the bus did have a mask on, so that was a little bit more reassuring, but we were pretty close together, so that was one of the cons of our experience for sure.
And that was our first day going to the theme park, so that did definitely get us a little scared. But once we got to the theme park, again, things were different.
So once we got to the theme park, they did another health screening, because some people are coming into the theme park that are not in a resort. So at the resort, they make sure before you leave that you do have your colored wristband on and you've had your health screening for the day. But if you're not coming from a resort, you do not have your wristband on. So they do another health screening at the park entrance. They also make sure you have your mask on. There's hand sanitizer before you enter the park. Once you're in the park experience is pretty much like the resort. You have to have your mask on unless you're eating, and if you're eating, you have to be in a dedicated eating zone. Of course, some people are walking around with drinks, but what I noticed is that once they took a sip or like a bite of something, they would put their mask back on. So I felt like people were super respectful of the mask ordinance and keeping distance from each other.
And I think this will make the experience feel safe, right? Again, like I said before, you can have all these rules in place, but if people aren't following them, there's no point. I think at the park, the days we were there, people were very respectful of all the rules and just created a safe feeling environment.
Yeah, and I think another thing to mention is that the employees or the staff were really enforcing the mask ordinance. So even if they saw like a mask under a nose, they would kind of notify them, hey, make sure it's over your nose. And they did it in a really fun way, because there was, I think, dedicated people that were on watch and they had microphones, and they're like, hey guys, like, just so we have an amazing experience, make sure your mask is over your nose. If you're eating or drinking, please go to a dedicated eating zone. And so it was like a really fun and easy way to remind the guests to maintain the mask ordinance.
And to add to that, not all the staff members were nice when enforcing this rule. Some people were just calling people out, and those were personally my favorite.
Yeah.
It was always fun seeing someone get called out for wearing a chin mask. But was again surprising, we genuinely thought that maybe 20% of the people weren't going to be doing it right, like wearing chin masks or mouth masks or just every possible way you can wear a mask incorrectly. But surprisingly, I want to say maybe 95% of the people were doing it right. You still had that 5% doing God knows what with their mask. And that's when you had people enforcing it. So that was pretty cool to see.
And also a big thing to note is that before a ride, hand sanitizer was required to enter. So there was a staff member at the entrance of every ride giving you a pump of hand sanitizer, as well as after you get off the ride, there was hand sanitizer available to hand sanitize your hands. So we had a plethora of hand sanitizer throughout our stay there.
As far as the rides goes, like Risa said, hand sanitizer everywhere before and after. The most we waited in line was probably 20 minutes for one of the Harry Potter rides. Other than that, everything was 5 minutes. We rode rides we've never ridden before because, for example, the Minions ride's always about 2 hours. We waited less than 5 minutes. We literally walked onto that ride. The experience in the rides was also very different. So they're separating parties. And in some areas, you have a whole kind of, whatever you want to call it, ride to yourself. So for example, in Transformers or Spider-Man, they're only putting single parties there. So that was a cool experience to be kind of riding in a ride just with us two. And it's something that, again, I'm not sure we'll ever see.
Another safety measure they took at the parks was eating at a restaurant. So they got rid of menus and they got rid of face-to-face ordering, and you just ordered through the app. And then they had you sit down at a table that was socially distanced, and they would bring your food to your table according to what you ordered on the app. So it minimized contact with workers as well as guests in the restaurant.
So to summarize the in-park experience, it was truly a very unique experience. In the end, it felt safe. Everybody was respecting the rules. They were enforcing the rules, and the park really wasn't crowded. So
not at all, yeah.
It felt fine. And I think one thing they talk about, right? It's hot in Florida. Wearing a mask all day is not that bad.
It's not bad at all. In fact, that was kind of a worry that we both had. Is it going to feel like we're suffocating in the Florida heat and humidity? But it was actually not that bad at all. I felt like I could breathe just fine. And on the rides, my mask did stay on pretty well. We had the surgical masks with the metal clip at the top, so those stayed on very well. And I felt like I could breathe just fine.
Breathing was not a problem.
Breathing was not a problem.
The only thing, at least for me, after 6 hours of wearing a mask, the back of my ears did get a little sore.
But for me, I was A-okay, super comfy, breathable. And they also have rest areas in the park, which are dedicated areas where you can take off your mask and breathe, drink some water. The majority of the people use those rest areas for eating. So if you got a little corn dog or something, you could go to the rest area and take off your mask and eat in peace. And they were also socially distanced, so every table at the rest area was 6 feet apart. So that was also another perk and safety precaution that they had at the park.
But during our 2 days there, we never felt the need or wanted to go to a rest area.
Yeah, so we didn't even use a rest area. I think the only time we ever had our mask off was when we were eating our lunch at the park, and that was in a dedicated restaurant. So we felt super safe the whole time we were there.
So in the end, we almost rode every single ride in both parks in 3 hours. That's how empty it was our first day, which is kind of insane to think. We actually could have ridden every ride in the theme parks, both Universal Studios Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios, if we wanted to. The reality was, like, we're not fans of like King Kong and Fast and Furious. So the rides we didn't ride wasn't because there was a long wait. It was just because we don't want to. So again, like, that's kind of insane to think you can literally knock out every ride in 2 theme parks within 4 hours. So overall, that was our experience. So, like, do we recommend it? That's a question that we really can't answer, right? For us, it was a great experience. It was a great time. The only time we did not feel safe in our entire road trip and in the theme park was the road trip and our first bus ride to the theme parks. Other than that, the entire experience, we felt safer there than we do in grocery stores. It's a tough recommendation because, again, once you're in a theme park, again, it feels safe, it's a good experience, but getting there is a tough part, right? You either have to do a road trip or fly, and that's something we just can't recommend at this time. It's a risk you're taking, and that's something that you have to answer for yourself.
So overall, it was a great experience. We don't regret it. When we came back, we immediately took a COVID test, just as a precaution to make sure that we were healthy and safe. So we self-quarantined until we got our test results back and they proved to be negative. So after that, we felt like, okay, now we can take walks in our neighborhood and we can kind of relax. Of course, we're still following all of the mask ordinance rules and we're only leaving the house when necessary. But we felt like since we took the precautions before our trip and after our trip, that we made the best decision for ourselves. So that's it, guys. That is our Universal Studios recap and how our experience was during this pandemic, how we felt about it. Maybe you'll choose to go to Universal Studios sometime soon. And if you do, comment below, let us know how it was, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.